I should have worn something less visible. The thought came too late as I adjusted the emerald silk dress for the 100th time, my fingers catching on the delicate beading at the waist. My cousin Isabella's wedding was supposed to be a quiet family affair at the Palazzo Marino. Nothing more than a few hundred relatives and close friends celebrating in the marble halls of North End Boston. Nothing ever stays simple in my family. I'd made a mistake in my father's eyes by choosing to show up at all. 3 years ago, I'd walked away from the family business with nothing but a degree in design and a stubborn heart. I'd built myself a quiet life, a small apartment in Cambridge, a freelance gig designing logos and websites for boutique companies, genuine friends who didn't know what my last name meant. I'd tasted freedom, and I'd never looked back. But Isabella was different. She was the good one, the gentle one, and she'd asked me personally to be at her wedding. How could I refuse her? The grand ballroom glittered with candlelight. The vaulted ceiling seemed to stretch toward heaven itself, and the orchestra occupied a raised platform near the floor-to-ceiling windows that overlook the harbor. Silk drapes in champagne and gold hung in elegant folds, and every detail screamed old money, old power, old sins. I stood near the eastern wall, nursing a flute of Prosecco and trying to remain invisible. My brother Marco spotted me earlier, and his jaw had clenched in that familiar way, the way that meant trouble. The way that meant you shouldn't be here. I'd ignored him. Isabella looked radiant walking down the aisle. Her fiancé, Giuseppe, was a decent man from the Marchesi family, 2 old families coming together. I'd heard my father mention it was a strategic alliance during a family dinner I'd attended last month, which was code for something I preferred not to understand. The ceremony had been beautiful. Now, during the reception, I was doing what I did best, observing, existing without being noticed, counting the minutes until I could reasonably leave. That's when the room went silent, not the gentle settling of quiet you'd expect when the band took a break, not the natural lull of conversation as people moved to dinner. This was different. This was the silence of a predator entering a space full of prey, and every nervous system in the room, mine included, registered the threat. I didn't look up immediately. I'd learned young that some attention is dangerous. But the silence pressed against my eardrums, physical and suffocating, and my hand tightened on the Prosecco glass. When I finally lifted my eyes, I understood. A man had entered the ballroom from the side entrance, the private one that connected to my family's offices. He wasn't alone. 2 other men flanked him, both broad-shouldered and sharp-eyed, but they might as well have been furniture. Every molecule of attention in the room had crystallized around the man in the center. He wore a black suit that looked like it had been painted onto his body. The jacket was tailored to perfection, falling just so across broad shoulders. His shirt was white silk, unbuttoned at the collar in a way that suggested he couldn't be bothered with formality, which meant he didn't need to pretend. A watch caught the light on his left wrist, understated, gold, expensive in a way that had nothing to do with ostentatious wealth. But it was his face that stopped my breath. Sharp, angular, a jawline that could cut glass and dark eyes that seemed to contain winters I'd never survive. His hair was dark, combed back with efficient severity, and there was a small scar along his left temple that somehow made him more dangerous, not less. He was scanning the room with the casual precision of someone surveying territory that already belonged to him. And then he saw me. I felt it like a physical touch, the exact moment his gaze locked onto mine. It wasn't sudden or dramatic. There was no widening of his eyes, no double take. He simply stopped looking at anyone else and looked only at me. And in that fraction of a second, the entire architecture of the ballroom shifted. The silence deepened. I couldn't breathe properly. My chest felt tight, compressed, like someone had wrapped steel bands around my ribs. His eyes, God, his eyes were dark as a midnight sea and just as unknowable. He didn't smile. He didn't nod. He simply looked at me with a kind of intense, focused attention that made me feel like I was the only thing in the room that mattered. The only thing that existed. My hand shook. I set the Prosecco glass on a nearby table before I could drop it. Around us, I registered movement, my father straightening near the dais, Marco's jaw tensing to granite, people turning to see where his attention had settled. The man moved. Not toward me he turned and shook hands with my father, who looked like he'd been struck speechless. There was a conversation, something my father said, and the man nodded once, slowly, his gaze sliding back to me for just a moment before he turned away. But that moment was enough. I felt branded, marked, like I'd just been catalogued by something predatory, something that never forgot. That's Dante Rossi. I spun to find Marco beside me, his voice low and urgent, his eyes fixed on the point where the man had disappeared into a private conversation with my father and several other senior family members. Marco's face was pale, and there was a tension in his shoulders that I'd never seen before. "Who?" I whispered, though I already knew. The name alone carried weight. "You need to leave," Marco said, still not looking at me. "Right now. Walk out of this ballroom and get in a car and leave. Don't attend the dinner. Don't say goodbye to Isabella, just go." "Marco, what are you?" "He's the Rossi family boss. He controls everything east of the harbor and half of what's west. He's dangerous, Arya. Not like father, not like the family business. He's dangerous in a way that doesn't follow our rules." I'd followed his eyes to where Dante stood with my father. He was listening to something my father was saying, nodding occasionally. But even from this distance, across this crowded ballroom, I could feel the weight of his attention elsewhere. He was still aware of me. "Why is he here?" I asked. "I don't know," Marco said, and I heard genuine fear in his voice, "and I don't want to find out." But it was too late for warnings. The ballroom had shifted into an entirely new world, one where silent men watched from across rooms, and the air carried the scent of danger like expensive cologne. I would learn, over the next weeks, that some silences change everything. 3 days after the wedding, someone followed me home from work. I didn't notice immediately. I was distracted, mentally composing design notes for a new client's website, navigating the Cambridge sidewalk with the comfortable autopilot of someone who'd walked this route 100 times. It was October, and the evening had cooled to that perfect in-between temperature where you could feel autumn settling into the city like a secret. The realization came in stages. First, the car, a black Mercedes sedan, sleek and impossibly expensive, traveling at exactly my walking pace 3 cars back. Then the figure I'd glimpsed in my peripheral vision at the coffee shop. The same man, or one of his associates, reading a newspaper while I waited for my latte. By the time I reached my apartment building, I wasn't just anxious. I was afraid. I'd lived in the same studio for 2 years, a tiny space on the 3rd floor of a converted brownstone. It was cramped and charming, with exposed brick and tall windows and absolutely no security system beyond a single lock on the door. I'd chosen it specifically because it felt removed from my family safe in its ordinariness. Now it felt like a trap. I climbed the stairs with my heart hammering against my ribs. My hands shook as I unlocked the door, and I half expected to find someone inside, but the apartment was exactly as I'd left it, my laptop closed on the small desk near the window, my jacket draped over the single chair, the kitchen pristine and empty. I locked the door behind me and stood in the darkness, breathing hard. My phone rang 2 minutes later. Unknown number. "Don't answer that," I whispered to myself, but I was already picking it up. "Hello, don't be afraid." His voice was low and smooth with an accent that suggested Italian childhood and American refinement. Just hearing it made something in my chest constrict. "Who is this?" I asked, though I already knew. "You've been asking about me," he said, ignoring my question. "Your brother was kind enough to provide information when I asked politely. You're Arya. You left the family. You're designing websites for people who don't know who your father is." The specificity of it made my skin crawl. He knew my entire life. He'd traced it like someone reading a book. "How did you get this number?" My voice sounded small to my own ears. "I own this building, actually. Or rather, my organization does. The landlord was cooperative." A pause. "You don't have to be frightened of me. You've been having me followed." Yes. The honesty was almost worse than the intrusion. He wasn't pretending, wasn't offering excuses. "What do you want?" I asked. "To meet you properly." Without the crowd, without your brother looking like he's about to have a cardiac event. Will you have dinner with me tomorrow night? No, I said immediately. I'll send a car at 8. He continued as if I hadn't spoken. Wear something you like. I said no. But he'd already hung up. I stood in the darkness of my apartment, phone still pressed to my ear, and realized that I'd just been issued an invitation that wasn't really an invitation. And worse than the fear, worse than the violation of having been followed was the strange warmth that had pooled in my stomach when he said my name. The next morning, I called Marco. He's dangerous, Marco said immediately, not bothering with a greeting. Jesus, Arya, did he contact you? He says he's sending a car tonight. He wants to have dinner. There was silence on the other end. Then, go. What? Go, Marco repeated, and his voice had that strained quality again, and listen to me very carefully. Don't antagonize him. Don't play games. Don't try to be clever. Just be yourself and pray that whatever he wants from you doesn't get you killed. Marco. He kills people, Arya. Not dramatically, not publicly, but he does it. But he also has rules. The fact that he's inviting you to dinner instead of just taking what he wants, that means something. I don't know what, but something. Just be careful. The car arrived at precisely 8 o'clock. It was a dark sedan, immaculate with tinted windows and a driver who didn't speak. I'd spent the entire afternoon in a state of anxiety, changing outfits 4 times before settling on black trousers and a cream-colored silk blouse that I'd convinced myself was neutral. Professional, not trying. The drive took 20 minutes. We headed toward the waterfront, toward the neighborhoods where the old money lived, in houses that should have been museums. The car pulled up to a restaurant I'd heard of but never been to, Arya, ironically enough, which catered to a clientele that had connections I didn't want to think about. A man waited at the door. Not Dante, but one of the men from the wedding. The ones who'd flanked him like shadows. Miss Santoro, he said, offering a slight bow of his head. Please follow me. He led me through the restaurant, past tables of elegant diners toward a private room in the back. The door was heavy wood, soundproofed probably, and when he opened it, I saw Dante sitting at a small table set for 2, studying a wine list like he had all the time in the world. He looked up when I entered, and the impact of his full attention, without the chaos of a ballroom around us, was almost physical. You came, he said. It wasn't a question. I didn't think I had a choice, I said, remaining standing. There's always a choice, he said, and he meant it. I wanted you to come because you chose to, but I would have found another way if you hadn't. Sit, please. I sat. The chair was plush, expensive, and I felt small in it. You're wondering why I'm interested in you, he said, pouring wine into a glass for me without asking if I wanted it. The younger Santoro sister who ran away from the family business. It's not the narrative you'd expect from someone like me. I don't know anything about someone like you, I said quietly. He smiled then, and it transformed his face into something almost approachable. That's exactly why I'm interested. You genuinely don't care what I am. You're not afraid of me because I'm powerful. You're afraid of me because your brother told you that I'm dangerous, and you're too intelligent to dismiss that. But you also came anyway. Because you said to come. No, he said, and his voice dropped lower. You came because some part of you wanted to. The same part that wore that emerald dress to your cousin's wedding, even though it made you visible in a room full of people who prefer to stay invisible. The same part that chose a life outside the family instead of living a comfortable lie. I didn't know what to say to that. He studied me like I was a painting he was trying to understand. My name is Dante, he said, though I already knew. And I'm going to be part of your life now, whether you want me to be or not. But I'm trying to do this with some respect for your autonomy, so tonight you can ask me anything you want. I'll answer truthfully. Tomorrow the conversation becomes more complicated. Why? I whispered. Because of how the room went silent when I looked at you, he said simply. Because I've never wanted something that badly before, and I don't like the feeling of not understanding it. The honesty was terrifying, but it was also seductive in a way I'd never experienced before. The dinner lasted 3 hours. We talked about everything except what mattered. He asked me about design, and I found myself explaining the philosophy behind negative space and how the right use of silence in a composition could make the entire piece stronger. He listened with genuine interest, asking questions that suggested he actually understood what I was saying. "Power is the same," he said quietly, swirling wine in his glass. "The thing that makes someone truly dangerous isn't the noise they make. It's what they choose not to say. It's the space they command just by existing in it." "That's very poetic for someone in your line of work," I said carefully. "I have a degree in philosophy," he replied with that small smile, "before I inherited the family business. When the car brought me back to my apartment, I was confused in a way that felt dangerous. This man was terrifying. He'd admitted to having me followed. He'd issued what was essentially a command masquerading as an invitation. And yet, he'd also listened to me talk about my work with genuine interest. He'd asked me questions about my life. He'd respected my space at the table, never leaning too close, never touching me beyond the brief contact of his hand when he helped me with my chair. For 3 days after that, nothing happened. No car appeared. No calls came. No sense of surveillance registered on my radar. It was as if he'd simply let me go. I told myself I was relieved. I told myself I was not, in fact, checking my phone obsessively, hoping for some communication. I told myself I was not thinking about his eyes, or the scar on his temple, or the way he'd said my name like it meant something. On the 4th day, he appeared in person. I was working late at a coffee shop downtown, reviewing design comps for a new client, when I noticed a man standing outside the window. One of Dante's people, I realized immediately. Just waiting, watching, not in a threatening way exactly, but present, unmissable. I packed up my things and walked out. "He's at the warehouse on Atlantic," the man said without preamble. "He asked me to bring you if you felt like coming." I should have gone home. I should have called Marco. I should have done literally anything except nod and follow the man to a car. The warehouse was industrial, massive. The kind of place that existed in the gaps between the respectable city and the one that operated in shadows. Inside, it was transformed. Exposed brick soared 3 stories high. Massive windows, all of them currently blacked out with industrial shades, faced the harbor. The space was half-furnished, expensive furniture, arranged with what looked like deliberate minimalism, and at the far end, near a wall of glass, stood Dante. He wore a burgundy button-down shirt, the sleeves rolled up to his elbows, and he was reading something, his brow furrowed with what looked like genuine concentration. He didn't look like the Mafia boss of Boston. He looked like someone who existed in a different register entirely. "Come here," he said, not looking up from whatever he was reading. I crossed the vast space, my footsteps echoing on the polished concrete floor. As I approached, I realized he was reading a book poetry, I thought, based on the slim spine. "Do you know Mary Oliver?" he asked, finally looking up. "A little," I said cautiously, "not extensively." He turned the book around to show me a page he'd marked. "This one's about the choice between safety and truth. She asks, 'Tell me, what is it you plan to do with your one wild and precious life?'" He closed the book gently. "I'm asking you the same thing." "I'm designing websites," I said, hating how defensive it sounded. "I'm building a career. I'm living." "You're hiding," he interrupted, "but not unkindly. You walked away from your family, and that took courage. But now you're hiding from everything else too. From connection. From risk, from the possibility that your life could be something more than safe." "Easy for you to say," I replied, anger flashing through the confusion. "You haven't exactly given me a choice. You've been having me followed. You got my phone number illegally. You—" "I know," he said, setting the book down on a nearby table. For the first time, something like remorse crossed his features. That was necessary. "But the choice I'm offering you now is real. I'm asking you to come into my world knowing exactly what that means. Knowing that I'm dangerous. Knowing that you could get hurt. Knowing that there's no going back to the life you had before. And if I say no, then I'll let you walk away," he said quietly. "You won't be followed. You won't be pressured. I'll remove myself from your life. but you'll spend the rest of your life wondering what would have happened if you'd had the courage to walk toward something instead of always walking away. It was a gift and a trap wrapped in the same words. What do you want from me? I asked. Everything, he said simply. But we'll start slow. Let me court you properly, Arya. Let me show you that someone like me can want someone like you for reasons that have nothing to do with your family or your last name. Give me that much. He moved toward me then, and I held my breath. He raised one hand and tucked a strand of hair behind my ear the first time he'd touched me since the wedding, when he hadn't touched me at all. That's all I'm asking, he said. Just the chance to try. When I left the warehouse an hour later, I'd agreed to let him take me to dinner the following Saturday. No pressure, I'd insisted. No surveillance. Real choice. He'd smiled and agreed, but I saw the understanding in his eyes. He'd known all along that I would say yes. He'd simply given me the illusion of choice because he was smart enough to understand that sometimes what we need is the story we can tell ourselves about how we made our own decisions. That night, I dreamed about dark eyes watching me from across a crowded ballroom. And for the first time, I didn't wake up afraid. The next 2 weeks were a careful dance I didn't know I was learning. Saturday dinner led to Sunday lunch. Lunch led to an evening at the opera, where he held my coat and ensured no one looked at me too long. The outings became public, carefully orchestrated appearances in restaurants and venues where the right people would see us together and understand the message, "She is under my protection." I tried not to think about what that message meant. What I noticed was that he never rushed me. He was courtly in a way that felt deliberately archaic, like he was drawing from some older playbook of romance. He'd ask about my day. He'd listen. He asked thoughtful questions about my designs and remembered details from previous conversations. He would sit close but never touch without permission, and when he did touch, taking my hand, placing his palm at the small of my back, it was always in a way that made the touch seem like it was my idea. It was devastatingly effective. What I also noticed was the violence that surrounded him, invisible but undeniable. Marco came to see me at my apartment on a Wednesday evening, looking haggard. He didn't ask how things were going with Dante. Instead, he told me that the Castellano family had attempted to move into territory that Dante had claimed. 3 of their men had been found in a garage in Dorchester, broken in ways that suggested someone had taken their time. No one was publicly discussing it, but Marco said that the message had been received. "You don't encroach on Dante Rossi's territory. It's because of you," Marco said, and there was genuine fear in his voice. "He's making moves to consolidate power, and people are starting to understand that it's connected to you, that you matter to him." "That's not my fault," I said, but guilt twisted through me anyway. "It becomes everyone's fault when people start dying," Marco replied. "I'm not saying leave him. God knows he'd probably find you and things would be worse, but understand what you're walking into. You're not a novelty to him, Arya. You're a message. You're a reason for him to prove himself." My father requested to see me. I arranged to meet him at his office, neutral territory, or as neutral as anything could be when dealing with my family. He was behind his desk when I entered, looking older than I remembered. His hair more gray than black now. Beside him stood another man I didn't recognize, but I understood from their proximity that he held power. "Your association with Dante Rossi has become a problem," my father said without preamble. "I'm not responsible for who I—" "Family politics are always about responsibility," he interrupted. "The Rossi family is ascending. Our allies wonder if we're positioning you as a bridge. Our enemies worry about the same thing. You're a pawn in a game you may not understand." "I don't care about family politics," I said, and I meant it. I left that world. "There is no leaving," my father said, and his voice carried the weight of genuine sadness. "There's only choosing what kind of role you'll play. You're playing Dante's role now, which means you're playing mine too. The question is whether you're playing it consciously or blindly." The third threat came from Dante himself, though it was delivered so gently I almost missed it. We were in his car driving back from a restaurant when he casually mentioned that a client of mine, a young tech startup, had received some visits from people asking about my reliability. Were my designs innovative? Were they trustworthy? What kind of connections did I have? They were just checking. Dante said, eyes on the road, making sure you're someone worth keeping around. You did this? I asked, hearing the hollow tone of my own voice. Of course. You're connected to me now. That means everyone you work with needs to be vetted. It keeps you safe, actually. Anyone who employs you understands they have a responsibility not to mistreat you. That's not safety, I said. That's control. The difference is often a matter of perspective, he replied with that careful patience that somehow made everything worse. You're unhappy. You're changing my life without asking. I'm protecting your life while being in it, he corrected. If you want to distance yourself from me, I can make that happen. Your clients will never hear from my people again. You can go back to being invisible, but we both know that's not what you want. How do you know what I want? Because, he said, finally glancing over at me, you're still here. You haven't run. You haven't called the police. Not that it would matter. You haven't asked me to leave you alone in any real way. You want this, Arya. You're just afraid of admitting it. The worst part was that he was right. Somewhere between the careful dinners and the gentle touches, between the conversations about poetry and the quiet displays of power, I had started wanting him. Not in spite of the danger, but perhaps because of it. Because he was the only person in my life who had ever treated my choices as real, even when he was orchestrating those choices. Because he looked at me like I was the most interesting thing in his world. Because somewhere in all of this, I'd become someone's. That Friday, I came home to find flowers in my apartment, not at the door inside. A key, I realized with a strange flutter of my heart, and no explanation beyond the enormous arrangement of white peonies and dark roses arranged in a vase that probably cost more than my monthly rent. My phone buzzed immediately. I apologize for the intrusion. The flowers are from yesterday. I wanted you to have something beautiful when you got home. I should have been angry at the violation of my space. Instead, I found myself breathing in the scent of the flowers, touching the silky petals of the roses, and feeling the walls I'd built around myself cracking. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat at my window looking out at Cambridge and tried to understand when I'd stopped being myself and become an extension of someone else's story. The answer was both terrifying and seductive. I wasn't sure it had ever been a choice. It happened on a Tuesday, though it was disguised as coincidence. My car wouldn't start. I stood in the parking lot of my building, jiggling the key in the ignition with increasing frustration, and a car appeared behind me within 10 minutes. Not an obvious arrival. The driver had simply been waiting in a coffee shop across the street. I would learn later. Ready. Always ready. I'll have my mechanic come by, Dante said when I called to tell him the problem. Until then, I'm sending a car for you. It's not negotiable, Arya. The world is complicated right now, and you shouldn't be alone in it. The world being complicated was his way of saying that the Castellano situation had escalated. 2 of Dante's warehouses had been burned. Someone had fired shots at the facade of his office building downtown. The power balance was shifting, tensions rising like a fever in the city's blood. And instead of stepping back, he pulled me closer. I was given a room in his penthouse, not his bedroom, but the one next to it with its own bathroom and a lock on the door that he assured me worked perfectly fine. I'd protested. I'd argued. I'd said that we barely knew each other, that this was moving too fast, that I wasn't ready. He'd listened patiently to all of it, and then arranged for my belongings to be collected from my apartment anyway. I want you safe, he said simply. Until I know the situation is under control, you stay here. I'm not arguing about this. The penthouse was a study in controlled luxury. Everything was neutral whites, blacks, grays, with occasional pops of color from the art on the walls. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the city, and there was something almost ethereal about being suspended above Boston like this, removed from the chaos below. The first night was awkward. I lay in the bed in my assigned room, listening to the subtle sounds of Dante moving through the space, showering in his bathroom down the hall, and felt the weight of what was happening settle on me like snow. By the 3rd day, the awkwardness had given way to something else. Tell me about your childhood, Dante said. We were sitting on the terrace, which was enclosed in glass to protect from the October wind. I was curled into the corner of a deeply comfortable chair and he occupied the opposite seat, a respectful distance between us. before the family business. There's not much to tell, I said. I was normal. I went to school. I did homework. You're being evasive. I'm being honest, I said. But I also shifted, getting more comfortable. Fine. I wanted to be an artist. I was obsessed with painting. But my father said it wasn't practical, that I should study something useful. So I studied design, which was a compromise between what I wanted and what he wanted. It was the first time I learned how to be small enough to fit into someone else's expectations. Dante was quiet for a long moment, and now I design websites for people who don't know who I am, which is its own kind of being small, I suppose. Just smaller in a direction that's mine. That's not small, he said. That's freedom. You escaped. You built your own life. But I'm here now, I said softly. In your penthouse. Locked away because of your war with the Castellanos. So did I really escape, or just exchange one form of control for another? This is not control, he said. And for the first time, there was heat in his voice. Control would be if I told you that you have to be here. I'm offering you safety. If you would prefer to go back to your apartment and risk that someone might use your relationship to me as a way to hurt you, then tell me now and I'll arrange it. I knew he wasn't bluffing. He'd let me go. He meant what he said that night in the warehouse. If I wanted out, he'd give it to me, even if it killed him. I want to stay, I said quietly. He nodded, accepting this without triumph. Then you stay because you choose to. Not because I'm keeping you. Do you understand the difference? I'm not sure that difference exists, I said. Not really. Not when you love someone. The words hung between us, suspended in the glass-enclosed space. I hadn't meant to say them. I'd meant to think them silently, to process them privately. But Dante had a way of drawing honesty out of me that was impossible to resist. Say that again, he said, and his voice had changed. It was softer, more raw. I didn't, Arya, say it again. I met his eyes and the intensity in them nearly broke me. I think I love you, I whispered. And I don't even know how that happened. He was out of his seat before I could take another breath, not to grab me to pace, walking to the window and staring out at the city like it had personally offended him. This is dangerous, he said finally. I know. You could get hurt. You could be used. You could… I know, I said again, standing up myself. I know all of it, Dante. I know I should walk away. I know this is the sensible choice. I know I'm walking into a life that has no real safety, no real stability, but I love you anyway. He turned then, and the expression on his face was so raw, so completely stripped of control that I almost didn't recognize him. This wasn't the dangerous man who commanded rooms. This was someone wounded, someone who had built walls so carefully that the possibility of them coming down terrified him. I need you to understand something, he said, coming toward me with the same careful slowness he always used, as if I was something precious that might shatter. I'm not capable of the kind of love you're describing. I'm capable of possession. I'm capable of possession. I'm capable of protection. I'm capable of keeping you alive and ensuring that nothing in this world hurts you. But the soft kind of love, the kind that poets write about, I don't know if that's in me. Show me, I said. Show me whatever you're capable of. I'll take it. He stopped a few feet from me. If I touch you now, I won't be able to stop. Then don't, I said softly. But he did stop. He closed his eyes, taking a breath, and when he opened them again, the control had returned. It was a visible effort, like he was pulling it around himself like a cloak. Not yet, he said. Soon. But not yet. You deserve better than this. My desperation, my inability to go slow. You deserve romance and gentleness, and right now I'm too wound up to give you anything but intensity. I don't want gentleness, I said. You will, he replied, stepping back, putting the distance between us again. But not tonight. Tonight, you rest. Tomorrow, we talk about what comes next. I spent the night tossing in bed, aching with want and confusion. By morning, I was no longer sure if he was protecting me or torturing me. The answer I would learn was that they were the same thing. The confrontation with the Castellanos came to a head on a Thursday. I didn't know it was happening. Dante left early in the morning with a brief kiss to my forehead and a murmured promise to call me later. I spent the day designing, attempting to focus on the clean lines of a new logo. But my attention kept drifting to the city below and what might be happening in its streets. The news hit at 4 o'clock. Gunshots at the Castellano construction site. 2 men dead, 3 wounded. The police were investigating. No arrests had been made. No one was claiming responsibility. My hand shook as I called Dante. He picked up on the first ring. "I'm fine," he said before I could ask. "Everyone on my side is fine. I saw the news. I know. That's why I'm calling. It's handled. In a few hours, the message will be sent that this ends now. But until then, I need you to stay in the penthouse. Don't answer the door. Don't go to the windows. Just stay safe. Bella." The endearment slipped out like it was something he said all the time, but I knew it was the first time. Bella. Beautiful, like I was something worth protecting, worth fighting for. "Be careful," I whispered. "I'm always careful," he said. "That's how I've stayed alive." He didn't come home that night, or the next morning. By afternoon, I was climbing the walls. I tried to work. I tried to read. I tried to sleep. Nothing worked. The city felt like it had shifted axis again, and I was suspended in that moment of not knowing what would come next. When Dante finally came through the door at 7 o'clock on Friday evening, I nearly didn't recognize him. He was still wearing the same clothes as yesterday, now stained with something dark that I didn't want to think about. His knuckles were bruised, the skin split in 2 places. There was a thin line of blood on his jaw, partially dried now. He looked like what he actually was, a predator, not a businessman. A force of nature, not a man. I made a sound half gasp, half sob, and I was moving toward him before I could think about it. "Don't," he said, holding up a hand. "Let me shower. I don't want you touching me like this." "I don't care. I care," he said, and his voice was hoarse. "I care that I've been in places I don't want on your hands. Let me be clean first." He disappeared into his bedroom. I heard the shower start, and I sat on the sofa in the living room, waiting, my heart not settling in my chest. When he emerged 30 minutes later, he was clean but clearly exhausted. He wore black sweats and a gray shirt, and his dark hair was still damp. He moved like something hurt, though I couldn't see any obvious injuries beyond the knuckles and the bruised line of his jaw. "It's finished," he said simply, sitting down across from me again. Not the close proximity I wanted. "The Castellanos have agreed to terms. Peace for 5 years, non-aggression pact. It's done." "How many people are dead?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment. "Enough." "Dante, I need you to understand something," he said, and his voice was different now, stripped down. "I'm not a good man, Arya. I know I've tried to be something more palatable when I'm with you. But what I do, the decisions I make, the violence I'm capable of, it's not theoretical. It's not something I read about in philosophy books. It's real, and it's part of me, and if you're going to be with me, you have to accept that." "I know that," I said. "Do you?" He leaned forward, and there was desperation in his eyes. "Because I've been thinking about you this entire time, wondering if what I was doing was making you a target or making you safer. And the truth is that I don't know. The truth is that loving you is dangerous for both of us." "I don't care," I said. "You should." His voice cracked slightly. "You should." His voice cracked slightly. "You should care. You should run. You should find someone who isn't going to bring this chaos into your life." I stood up and moved to him, and this time he didn't stop me. I sat beside him on the sofa, close enough that our thighs were almost touching. "Stop trying to be noble," I said quietly. "Stop trying to convince me to leave. You want me here. I want to be here. That's enough." "It's not enough," he said. "I want you to choose this knowing exactly what it costs." "What does it cost?" I asked. "Everything," he said. It costs you normal. It costs you the possibility of a quiet life with someone who comes home from an office and doesn't have blood on his hands. It costs you security in the way normal people understand it. It costs you the option of changing your mind. Because once you're really mine, once you've seen enough, known enough, you're tied to this forever. That sounds like you're asking if I'll be your wife, I said, and there was a tremor in my voice. He turned to look at me fully then. I'm asking if you can live with what I am. I can live with who you are, I corrected. Those aren't the same thing. He reached out and took my hand then. His fingers were warm and he traced the lines of my palm like he was reading some truth there. I don't know how to love someone softly, he said. I don't know how to do this the way it's supposed to be done. Then show me the way you know, I said. That's all I'm asking. He leaned toward me then, slowly, giving me time to pull away if I wanted. I didn't pull away. His hand came up to cup my face, and his thumb traced my cheekbone. When he kissed me, it wasn't gentle. It was deep and thorough, and tasted like desperation and devotion. And it felt like the most honest thing that had ever happened between us. When he pulled away, his forehead rested against mine. I love you, he said. That's the only thing I'm certain of. I love you in a way that terrifies me, and I don't know what to do with that. You don't have to do anything, I whispered. Just let me love you back. We held each other on that sofa as the night deepened around us, and in the darkness of his penthouse, suspended above the city, I felt like I had finally found the thing I'd been running from all my life, a place to belong. Saturday arrived with a kind of inevitability. Dante had returned to work, meetings with his people, the machinery of his empire continuing despite the fragile peace. I'd spent the morning on the terrace, supposedly working, but mostly watching the city below and thinking about where we were heading, what would happen next. By evening, he came to find me. I was curled in a chair near the bedroom window, still wearing the clothes I'd had on all day, soft leggings and an oversized sweater. My hair was loose, unstyled. I hadn't bothered with makeup. I felt exposed in my ordinariness. But Dante's gaze when he appeared in the doorway suggested that I was anything but ordinary. Hi, I said softly. Hi, he replied, and he pulled off his tie, his jacket, everything that made him look like a businessman. He was left in a white shirt with the sleeves still cuffed, and he looked tired and hungry and completely intent on me. I've been thinking, I said, about what you said, about not knowing how to love someone softly. Have you now? He moved toward me, and I watched him come, my breath catching slightly. I don't think I need soft, I continued. I never have. I've always been more comfortable with intensity, with realness. He stood in front of my chair, looking down at me. You're giving me permission. It wasn't a question. I nodded anyway. Say it, he said softly. I need to hear you say it. I want you, I said, and my voice was barely above a whisper. I'm ready. He offered me his hand, pulling me out of the chair. We stood there for a moment, just looking at each other, and then he bent and scooped me into his arms, carrying me toward his bedroom. The room was exactly what I expected. Minimalist, expensive, dominated by a bed that looked like clouds. He set me down gently near it and stepped back, giving me space. We can slow down, he said. We can stop anytime, do you understand? I understand, I said, but I don't want to slow down. I don't want to stop. He started with my sweater, pulling it up carefully, pausing at each moment to make sure I wasn't going to change my mind. I lifted my arms to help him, and when the sweater was gone, I stood before him in just the tank top I'd been wearing underneath and my leggings. God, he said quietly, just looking at me, you're beautiful. I felt self-conscious, exposed, but the way he was looking at me like I was something sacred, something worth revering, made me feel less like I was on display and more like I was being truly seen. He reached out and traced the curve of my waist, and the touch sent electricity down my spine. His hand was warm and steady, moving with careful intention. He cupped my face and kissed me again, this time slower than the night before, but no less intense. It was the kind of kiss that felt like a conversation, like a promise. When we moved to the bed, I was trembling. He noticed. "Cold?" he asked. "No," I said, scared. "But not of you." "Then what?" "Of how much I want this," I admitted. "Of how much I want you." He settled me onto the bed, kissing my collarbone, my shoulder. His hands were everywhere in my hair, on my waist, supporting my back, and every touch felt deliberate, considered. There was no fumbling, no awkwardness. There was only the slow building of want, the gradual unveiling of skin and breath. When he pulled my tank top over my head, I made a small sound. When he unhooked my bra, I felt vulnerable in a way that should have frightened me, but instead made me feel safe. "You're perfect," he whispered against my ribs. "I'm not. Let me decide what you are," he said. And there was something commanding about it, but not unkind. Not domineering, just definitive. Like his perception of me overruled my own doubts. He continued slowly, carefully, watching my face for any sign of hesitation. My hands moved over him, pulling off his shirt, running across the muscle and scar tissue of his chest. There were more scars than I expected, each one a story he wasn't telling. I kissed some of them, and he went very still. "Aria," he said, and my name in his mouth sounded like a prayer. When we finally came together, it was unhurried despite the intensity of it all. He looked into my eyes the entire time, and I couldn't look away. This wasn't just physical. It was a claiming, a binding, a transformation happening at a cellular level. It hurt slightly, the stretching of my body to accommodate him, but it was the good kind of hurt, the kind that felt like proof of change. I made a small sound, and he paused. "I'm okay," I whispered. "Keep going." He moved slowly, deliberately, watching my face for signs of genuine discomfort. I'd expected there to be more passion, more aggression, based on everything he'd said about his nature. Instead, what I found was exquisite control. Every movement was calculated to maximize my pleasure, to draw out my responses. He was keeping himself on a tight leash, and the effort of it showed in the tension of his jaw, the careful regulation of his breathing. "You can let go," I said, reaching up to touch his face. "With me." Something flickered across his expression, surprise maybe, or relief. He took my invitation as permission. His pace quickened slightly, his breathing deepened. He buried his face in my neck, and I felt him trembling slightly. This powerful man shaking with what I understood was genuine emotion, genuine need. When it ended, we lay tangled together, his arms around me, my head on his chest. His heartbeat was still racing, and I could feel the slight tremor still running through him. "That was," he started. "Yeah," I agreed, not needing the words. We lay there in the darkness, and I felt like I had crossed some threshold that couldn't be uncrossed. I was his now in a way that went beyond choice or decision. I was bound to him through pleasure and vulnerability and the terrifying truth of what we were beginning to be to each other. "Stay," he said, and it wasn't a command, just a request. "I'm not going anywhere," I replied, but even as I said it, I knew that wasn't entirely true. Everything had changed. The world was different now. And somewhere in the city below, threats were still moving, shadows still gathering, and the price for what we had just claimed would still need to be paid. We just didn't know it yet. 3 weeks of peace. That's what we got. I had never realized how much I wanted ordinary things until I had them. Waking up next to Dante in his massive bed, the city still dark outside. His hand in mine as we had coffee on the terrace, not talking about work or danger, just existing, designing from the home office he'd set up for me, with his presence somewhere in the penthouse, solid and constant. The first crack came when Dante's business associate, a man named Paolo, was found murdered. He'd been shot execution style at a warehouse, and the message was clear enough that even I, with my limited understanding of the Mafia world, could interpret it. This isn't over. The truce is broken. Dante didn't tell me. I found out from the news, and when he came home that evening, his face told me everything. "Who?" I asked. Someone I needed to trust, he said, pouring himself a drink with hands that weren't quite steady. Someone who apparently decided the Castellano family was offering a better deal. Does this mean? It means I have to respond, he said. It means we're back to war. I felt something crystallize in my chest. What do you need from me? He looked at me like I'd surprised him. Nothing. You stay here. You stay safe. You don't leave this building unless I'm with you. And if you don't come back, I asked quietly. He didn't answer. He set down his drink and pulled me close, and I felt the tension in his body, the coiled readiness of someone preparing for battle. I'll always come back, he said against my hair. That's not negotiable. But he was lying. We both knew it. In his world, there were no guarantees. The second shift came a week later. I was alone in the penthouse. Dante had gone to a meeting when I heard the explosion. Not close, not immediate, but close enough that the windows rattled and car alarms wailed through the streets below. My phone rang immediately. Dante's number. Get away from the windows, he said without preamble. Go to the panic room. The code is your birthday. Go now. What happened? I asked, already moving. One of my facilities, he said, and I could hear shouting in the background. They're escalating. Go to the room. Lock the door. Don't open it for anyone but me or Marco. Dante, go, he commanded. And the phone went dead. The panic room was hidden behind a painting in the master bedroom, a panic room that I'd known existed, but had somehow managed not to think about too closely. It contained water, food, medical supplies, and a small safe that I was sure held documents, money, whatever someone might need to disappear with. I sat in there for 6 hours. 6 hours of complete silence, broken only by the sounds of the city outside, muffled by soundproofing. 6 hours of not knowing if the man I loved was alive or dead. 6 hours of understanding, with complete clarity, what I had signed up for when I chose to love Dante Rossi. When the door finally opened, it was Marco, not Dante. My heart nearly stopped. Where is he? He's fine, Marco said quickly, seeing my expression. He's at the other location. He sent me to get you. Come on. We left in a car that wound through streets I didn't recognize. Marco had blood on his shirt, not his, he assured me, and he moved with the controlled intensity of someone still half submerged in combat. When I tried to ask questions, he just shook his head. The safe house was in Cambridge, a brownstone not unlike the building I'd once lived in, except that it had security I couldn't see but could feel. Dante was in a back room, and when I saw him, the breath caught in my chest. He had a bandage on his upper arm, and his left eye was starting to swell. His knuckles were split again, but he was alive, and when he saw me, he pulled me into his arms like I was something that had been missing from his body. I'm sorry, he said into my hair. I'm so sorry. For what? I asked. For this, for bringing you into this, for every choice that led to you sitting in a panic room, terrified. I pulled back to look at him. Don't apologize for being who you are. I chose this. I'm choosing this. Every day. People are dying, Arya. The city is tearing itself apart because of what I'm building, what I'm protecting. And you. He touched my face gently. You're a target now. You're the reason they'll come at me. You're the weakness they found. Then make sure they don't get to me, I said simply. Make sure I'm the last thing they'd ever try. Protect me the way you know how. He kissed me then, fierce and desperate, like he was trying to imprint himself on me in a way that would make me impossible to destroy. I love you, he said. That's the only thing I'm certain of anymore. That I love you and that I'll burn the world down rather than lose you. I know, I said, and I love you too. We spent that night together in a bed that wasn't his, in a room that smelled of new paint and furniture arranged with temporary intention. He held me against him, and I could feel him not sleeping, just holding me like I was fragile. By morning, there was new news. 3 Castellano facilities burned. 2 of their lieutenants dead. The message had been sent, received, and answered. The war, Dante said, would be over within days. One way or another. Which way do you want it to be? I asked quietly. He was quiet for a long moment. The way where you're still safe. Beyond that, I don't care. I understood then that he meant it. He would sacrifice anything, his peace, his power, his pride, as long as I remained untouched by all of this, and that understanding felt both beautiful and terrifying, because I knew that it made me his ultimate vulnerability. And in his world, vulnerabilities were things that got exploited. The Castellano family surrendered to Dante's pressure, but they didn't disappear. Instead, they scattered. Some left the city entirely, relocating to territory neutral enough that they could survive. Others bent the knee and agreed to work under Dante's oversight, which meant a slow process of integration and careful trust. A few, the ones who were truly dangerous, simply vanished into the underworld and waited. The war was over. Dante had won. And somehow that made everything more complicated. We moved back to the penthouse, but something fundamental had shifted. I could see it in the way Dante's people looked at me. Not with disrespect, but with a kind of careful distance, understanding that I held a power over him that made me dangerous to be close to. I could see it in the way Dante himself changed slightly, becoming more controlled, more deliberately distant in public, as if proximity to me had become something he needed to guard carefully. 1 week after the surrender, Dante called a meeting. I should have been in another room, but instead, I sat at the edge of the conference table, and he didn't object. I was part of his world now, no longer something to be hidden away. The decision to include me in this space was deliberate, a statement. Castellano family has agreed to the terms, Dante said, his voice measured. They retain operations in 2 neighborhoods, with monthly payments to this organization. Anyone who doesn't accept this arrangement is no longer considered part of the family. And the ones we don't trust? A man I'd come to know as Victor asked. We watch them, Dante said, and if they make a move against us, we respond. But for now, we operate as if peace is possible. Sometimes, he glanced at me, it's worth trying. After the meeting was over, Dante led me back to his office and closed the door. That was a calculated risk, I said, showing me in there. Yes, he acknowledged. It sends a message. What message? That you're not a weakness to be ashamed of, that I'm choosing to be someone who can have something to protect beyond his own power. He sat on the edge of his desk. It was also something I needed you to see. I need you to understand that there are 2 versions of me now. The one in this room and the one you are. This organization. These decisions, they don't change what's between us, but they are real, and they will always have a place in my life. I know that, I said. I've always known. Have you? He asked, because I wonder sometimes if you've really accepted it, or if you're just telling yourself that you have. I moved toward him, standing between his knees. Dante, I'm here. I'm choosing to be here every single day. If that changes, I'll tell you. But I need you to stop waiting for me to leave. He pulled me against him. I'm terrified that I'll wake up and you'll realize what a disaster this is. What a disaster I am. Then don't wait for that, I said. Let me love you while I'm choosing to. That night, he proposed. It wasn't romantic in the traditional sense. We were in the shower, and he simply said, "Marry me." And when I stared at him through the steam, he repeated it. I'm not asking this perfectly, and it won't be perfect. But I need you to understand that you're not temporary. You're the structure. Everything else is built around. So marry me. Yes, I said, and it sounded like a surrender, like a triumph, like an acceptance of everything. The wedding happened quietly without fanfare, just Marco and a few trusted people from Dante's organization, and a judge who owed favors. I wore a white dress that I'd designed myself. Simple, elegant. Nothing like the fantasy wedding I'd imagined as a girl. Dante wore a dark suit, and when he looked at me, the intensity in his gaze never wavered. You're mine now, he said when we were alone afterward, in a hotel room somewhere private. I should have been bothered by the possession in those words. Instead, I felt only relief. I was always yours, I said. I'm just finally official about it. We made love slowly that night, with the understanding that something had shifted. Not the physical act that remained as intense and emotional as it had been from the beginning, but the context had changed. I was his wife now. We were bound not just by passion, but by law, by choice, by the careful architecture of commitment. By morning, everything had shifted again. Dante's phone rang just after dawn. I watched his expression change as he listened, watched the moment when protection gave way to something else. When he hung up, he turned to me. "There's been a development with the Castellanos," he said carefully. "Nothing you need to worry about directly, but it means I have to leave the city for a few days. I'm going to need you to stay here." "For how long?" "A week, maybe 2, he said. "Depends on how things resolve." I wanted to ask what it meant. I didn't. Instead, I just nodded and said, "I'll be here." But after he left, after I watched his car disappear into the city, I understood something that hadn't quite crystallized before. I had a choice. I could still leave. I could still walk away. Nothing he'd done to me had removed my autonomy. He'd just made me want to stay, and that was somehow more terrifying than any forced captivity could have been. I sat in the penthouse, surrounded by luxury and loneliness, and realized that this was the real test. Not the violence, not the danger, not the dramatic moments of passion and near loss. This was the real test, the quiet waiting. The faith that he would come back. The acceptance that our life together would always have absences and uncertainties. By the end of the week, he returned. I heard his key in the lock, heard him moving through the penthouse, heard him pause at the bedroom door, taking in the sight of me asleep in his bed. "Hey," he said quietly, sitting on the edge. I woke up fully. "You're back." "I'm back," he confirmed. "Things are handled. The Castellanos are integrated. The city is stable." "How did you do it?" I asked. He was quiet for a moment, very carefully, and by reminding them that some people aren't worth the cost of fighting anymore, that sometimes survival means accepting what you can't change. I understood then that there had been more death, more violence, more of the cost that his world demanded, but he wasn't telling me details, which meant he was protecting me in the only way he knew how. I pulled him down to me instead of asking more, and as we moved together in the darkness, I made a final, complete surrender. Not to his domination, but to the reality of who we were and what we had chosen. 6 months later, life had taken on the texture of routine. I worked from home, designing for clients, my freelance business having expanded significantly. Once word got out that I was connected to Dante Rossi, that particular advantage made me uncomfortable in ways I didn't like to examine too closely, so I tried not to. Instead, I focused on the work itself, on the satisfaction of creating something beautiful that had nothing to do with the world's darker elements. Dante came home for dinner most nights. Some nights, he didn't come home at all. I'd learned not to ask questions about those nights. The apartment had become even more mine over the months. I'd brought in plants and artwork. I'd insisted on redesigning the kitchen. His minimalist aesthetic didn't account for the fact that cooking required accessibility, and I'd been the one to convince him that beauty and function could coexist. He'd let me, watching me work with that same focused attention he gave to everything. "You're happy," he'd observed one evening, watching me arrange herbs in the window boxes. "I am," I'd said, and it was true in a way that surprised me. I was happy in the way someone can be happy while living on the edge of an active volcano, always aware of the danger but dazzled by the light and heat. The trouble started small, the way it always does. A girl went missing, 16 years old, taken from the street near her school. It was in the news for 3 days before it became my problem. Dante came home that evening looking grim. "One of the Castellano lieutenants has a daughter," he said. "She was taken by a rival organization. It's a move against them, which means it affects us indirectly. I'm going to help locate her." "Okay," I said simply. I'd learned that okay was the only answer to these updates. What I didn't know was that the girl would be found in one of Dante's warehouses, drugged and terrified, having been moved there by a Castellano informant who was trying to frame Dante for the kidnapping. The play was sophisticated and nearly worked. I found out when Marco came to get me early one morning, his face ashen. "There's been an accusation," he said, "against Dante. The girl's family is claiming that his organization kidnapped her. The police have enough to make an arrest. He's turning himself in to negotiate, but what?" I asked, already moving, already grabbing my coat. "But they want you," Marco said quietly. "The lieutenant who set it up has made it clear that you're the reason Dante will suffer, that using you is the way to truly hurt him." My blood turned to ice. "Where is he?" "Police station downtown. Arya, you need to be smart about this. You need to understand that if you go there, if you put yourself in the middle of this, you're going to be a target in a way you've never been before. He wouldn't want that." "I don't care what he'd want," I said. "I'm his wife. Where he is, I am." The police station was a blur of fluorescent lighting and the smell of old coffee. Dante's lawyer was already there, making calls, pulling the machinery of expensive defense into place. But Dante refused to leave the interrogation room. He sat across from two detectives, and when they allowed me to see him, I understood why. He was deliberately making himself suffer. His knuckles were marked where he'd been cuffed too tightly. His jaw was bruised, not from interrogation, I realized, but from the internal struggle to keep his hands visible, to prove he was cooperating, to not take apart the men in this room. "You shouldn't be here," he said when I sat across from him, the detective remaining at the periphery of the room. "Yes, I should," I replied. "I'm your wife. I'm your alibi for half of the relevant timeline. I'm also going to testify that the girl couldn't have been in your warehouse because I was renovating it during the dates in question, and I have workers who saw me every single day." "Arya, stop," I said. "Stop trying to protect me from being connected to you. That ship sailed 6 months ago. We're connected. They can try to use that against you, but they can't remove it. So what they can use is the truth, and the truth is that you have an alibi." It took 3 days, but the charges were dropped. The girl was examined and found to be in the care of the rival organization, not Dante's. Dante's warehouse was checked and found to contain nothing incriminating. The lieutenant disappeared. Having failed his play, he understood that Dante would eventually find him. When Dante was released, he didn't take me home immediately. Instead, we went to a safe house that Marco had arranged, and once we were alone, Dante fell apart. Not dramatically, not with violence. He simply sat down and shook, and I held him, and neither of us pretended that this was just about the arrest. "I realized," he said quietly, "that my love for you is a liability I can't afford, that every choice I make to protect you is a choice that weakens me, that using you as leverage would destroy me." "Yes," I said, because he'd finally spoken the truth that had been haunting him since the beginning. "I need you to leave," he said, "not because I don't love you. Because I do. Too much. It's going to get you killed, Arya, and I can't live with that." I should have been shocked. Instead, I found myself calm. "No, I repeated. "I'm not leaving. And yes, being connected to you is dangerous. Yes, people will try to use me against you. But that's also true of Marco, and you don't ask him to leave. It's true of everyone in your organization, and you don't ask them to abandon you. The difference is that I'm the one person in your life you feel responsible for protecting, which makes you weak. So here's what we're going to do instead." "What?" he asked. "We're going to make sure I'm so integrated into this world that using me becomes more trouble than it's worth. We're going to get me trained. We're going to make sure I have resources and exits and the knowledge to survive if something happens to you. We're going to turn your greatest weakness into something less exploitable, and we're going to do it together." He looked at me like I was speaking a language he'd never heard. "You want to be trained in security protocols?" "I want to be able to defend myself," I clarified. "I want to stop being the fragile thing that you have to constantly protect. I want to be a partner instead of a liability." It took convincing. It took weeks of argument and compromise, but eventually, Dante agreed. I started training with Marco hand-to-hand combat, weapons, tactical awareness. I learned the back exits of every place we frequented. I learned how his security system worked. I learned about dead drops in safe houses and the practical architecture of survival. More importantly, I learned that Dante began to relax slightly, not because I became capable of fighting his battles, but because I stopped being something he had to carry. I became something that could stand beside him, even if that something was still learning to walk on this terrain. 6 months after the arrest, I was pregnant. We discovered it on a Tuesday morning, and Dante's reaction was complicated joy and terror mixing in his expression as he processed what it meant to bring a child into this world. "We'll keep them safe," I said, reading his thoughts in the tightness of his jaw. "How?" he asked. "How do I keep a child safe in this life?" "The same way my parents tried to protect me," I said, "imperfectly, with rules and love and the understanding that some things are worth any amount of fear." He pulled me close, his hand on my still flat stomach. "I want them to have choices," he said. "I want them to have the freedom to walk away the way you did." "Then we'll give them that," I said. "We'll give them both worlds, safety and freedom, love and autonomy. We'll do our best, and we'll fail sometimes, and we'll keep trying anyway." The city continued below us, beautiful and corrupt, dangerous and alive, and inside the penthouse, suspended between worlds, we began to build something new. Not a normal life, never that, but something real, something worth fighting for, something with roots deep enough to endure even when the ground beneath shifted. When our son was born, 8 months later, Dante looked at him with an expression of such raw love that I understood something fundamental. He had changed. Not become soft, he would never be that, but he had shifted, had allowed love to reshape him into someone who could hold both power and tenderness in the same hands. By his crib, in the night when Dante thought no one was watching, I would see him whisper promises of protection and freedom, of a world less violent than the one he inhabited. I would see him choose again and again to be more than his circumstances demanded. It wasn't redemption. You don't redeem yourself from a life built on violence through love, but it was transformation. And as I watched him with our son, understanding that our child would inherit both his dangerous legacy and his capacity for love, I knew that the room would go silent when he entered spaces for his entire life. People would know who his father was. There would be consequences and dangers and costs that I couldn't protect him from. But he would also know from the beginning that the most dangerous man he'd ever meet was capable of surrender.